Hello, everybody.
Hello, welcome to everybody. Welcome to this new appointment of our Renoon Webinar series. Today we are here as last month with Caterina Occhio, and today we'll be having a chat about risk assessment, about responsible supply chain due diligence, in order to understand what's the value of doing social due diligence. So in a couple of minutes, in the meantime that other people join the webinar, we'll be starting. So I will also remember to everyone that this will be a recorded session. So after the webinar, you will receive a thank you email with the link to access the recording. So you will have the time also to watch the full webinar later. So this is the agenda of today. So we have many topics to cover. And I will also remind you that if you have any question, you can put them in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end of this webinar to answer your question. Of course, you can also raise your hand, and we will open your microphone to speak and ask. So for those who doesn't know me, I'm Sara. I'm from the Renoon team. And now I leave the floor to you, Caterina. So you can start presenting yourself for the people who were not there at last webinar, and then I think we can start today's discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. So, welcome, everybody. I am very happy to be here again with Renoon with a series of webinars. We will be talking about arguments we touched upon last time. So, for those who were with us, this could be a repetition, but the argument of responsible supply chain and traceability in the supply chain is getting more and more pressing. My name is Caterina Occhio. I have been working for 30 plus years now in the luxury industry, particularly focusing on supply chain. So I'm what you may call an expert in social sustainability and responsible supply chain. I actually am an advisor to the UN Industrial Development Organization on this same topic and have been working also extensively for the corporate world for several brands. And I'm also have the honor to be in the global board of the World Fair Trade Organization. Now, indeed, has been a long time that I've been around. It's been a long time that the topic of social due diligence has been on the agenda. But if you, Sarah, want to go to the next slide, what we would like to discuss with you is how hot this topic is becoming recently, mostly due to the scandal in the Italian supply chain. I mean, I'm sure you have heard the news that keep popping up on more and more brands that have been involved in abuse to worker rights in their supply chain. Now, I'm Italian myself, and indeed, it could be tempting to say that this is an Italian problem. It could be tempting to say that this is happening because Italy does not have the right system in place or does not have the right controlling mechanism in place. And I wish it was like that somehow, although again, I'm Italian myself. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Because what recent cases are revealing is that it's the ecosystem, it's not the brand, it's the blind spots in the way supply chain are managed that are a global problem. So the the idea and the opportunity that we have right now is to take what has now been revealed as symptomatic of how nowadays supply chain up to today, let's say, have been managed and try to support a business case for a cultural shift, for a change in the management of supply chain. For you, Sarah, I want to go to the next slide. First of all, why is it important? You know, we have been saying also last time the legislation are coming, mostly on the European market. Yes, it is true. The legislation like the CSDD, the due diligence directive have been watered down. There's a reality. We all know it. Many of them, particularly the one regarding the supply chain, so the CSDD, nowadays is going to be applied mostly only to companies that have over 5,000 employees. Again, this is a watered down indeed, but still, there is a very clear indication from the legislation side that whether later on, whether watered down, whether changing, this is going to shift the way we operate also in the social part of the ESG system. Right now, the legal threats are also accompanied, as we said, by a risk and loss of stakeholder confidence because most of the supply chain, when are not traced, when are not documented, they are posing very high reputational risk. This reputational risk do have repercussion into the entire brand, not just on the brand value, but also on the way the brand operate. Recent study from the Harvard Business Review or even from Deloitte on 24, the reputational risk and the disruption failure within the supply chain are also over 60% of corporate crisis because basically because they are the one most opaque or the one more fragmented for whatever reason that we will try to understand later on. These are one of the biggest risks that needs better management, and that is having a direct impact on how disbursement of funds, disbursement of investment, disbursement of finance is going to happen more and more in the near future. So basically, if you do not manage your risk properly, if you do not in the supply chain as well, from a social due diligence perspective, this is going to be a serious threat to your financing in the near future. And if we want to go to the next slide, Sarah. What's going to change? What has to change? What we said before, fashion has a very complex supply chain. We do know that, maybe 95, 99% of the brands do not own the supply chain. So they resolve in having production, manufacturing done by other entities. And those other entities, which very often is known as the tier one, basically the one that has a direct link to the brand, this direct link to the tier one of supply chain is just the top of the iceberg. We all know that below a series of subcontracting units, subcontracting manufacturers or workshop or atelier, or no matter how small they are, they constitute the pyramid that in the end produce and make the product that the brand is going to bring to the market. Just to give you an idea, I'm sure maybe you know even better than me, to make one pair of shoes, okay, with just one pair of sneakers, let's put it this way. One pair of sneakers has one main contractor that in the end gives the sneaker to the brand, but it requires at least 10 subcontractors doing each of the parts that afterwards provide to the main contractors the entire part that assemble them and that sells it to the brand. So it's a very complex and very often long and opaque. Few people or few brands really understands and knows very well who does what when and have a clear understanding of the ecosystem that is necessary for them to produce all the product that they put on the market. Now, how do they check that they are done properly? Well, usually they use the audits, but the audits that they do, basically sending third party to check that things are well done, that everything is placed, it is in the right place, that labor rights are respected, and that all that is part of the social sustainability, of the social due diligence, is well in place, well, they do it in a very static manner. So how you play soccer determines if you win the game at the end or not. It's not just enough to play soccer, it's how you do it. And then we're going to check how to do it properly in order to win the game in the end. And governance. How do you organize, how do you manage, and how do you make sure that the processes running the subcontracting and the check of the subcontracting to the audit is well done? How do you make sure that the problems are reported up to the board that needs to take a decision when this traditional oversight is not done on a very articulated, not on a very depth basis. And this is leading to all the problems that we are witnessing. If we go to the next slide, we can try to understand that how this has to change. Back to the Italy, which is where all the scandals originated, they still are based, the government decided to intervene. There is a new directive, a new legislation that is trying to put in place due diligence and liability obligation across all the tiers, so across the first tiers and across the subcontracting. And they are bringing forward a volunteer registry and this volunteer certification system, which should guarantee to the brand the respect of the workers' rights, the respect of all the legislation that are in place for a decent environment, for a decent work. I use the word decent because at international level, the decent work agenda of ILO is also what has been beyond and behind the European product level traceability obligation. I'm sorry. And also forms the basis of the CSDD, the due diligence legislation that we briefly mentioned beforehand, that has been at the basis of the process assuring that human rights and environmental criteria are respected throughout the value chain and throughout the supply chain. And again, investors have been rising quite some problem and issue. I mean, I'm sure you read, I don't know if you read, I'm not sure actually, I hope you did see that when Dior was actually incriminated by the Italian prosecutor for not regular use of the labor registration in Italy. I mean, this happens about a year ago. What shareholders started to raise quite some issues and started to interrogate the entire board of Dior, asking for better understanding, not just of what happened, but better processes and governance of how to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because basically, they felt just that while consumer expectations are rising, they felt that the brand value was impacting also the evaluation, the financial evaluation of the brand. So business as usual is no longer possible. Now, if you go to the next slide, Sarah. What we need to do to change that is to make sure that the internal control has to be, first of all, go beyond tier one, make sure that the informal, the subcontractor, and the home-based labor that too often go under the radar, they come up and become again visible. And most importantly, could we stop waiting for the scandal to act? Because very often when you wait to be caught, by in this case, by the persecutor, you are already so far ahead into and mismanagement your supply chain that you get into crisis management. And crisis management are simply more expensive than just making sure and work with the right calm and with the right budget as well to avoid the crisis management and to avoid also a loss in financial value of your precious brand. So to the next slide, please, Sarah. what is that has to be done. You know, there is nothing that I'm going to tell you today that probably you don't know. Because actually, what good looks like is something that is well known to most of us. The issue, and I'm going to go through what I think should be the 5 key points to pay attention to when making sure that the system are in place that so that the scandal doesn't hit you, and when it hits you, it's not it's well prepared somehow. Also the response to a possible scandal. These are some best practices that should be implemented. Okay. Again, understand who does what, how many, and where, and how are the manufacturing, the workshop, the home base, whatever, everybody that is in the universe, in this incredible ecosystem of manufacturing the products that you, brand, are bringing to the market, make sure to know them all, map them, and go deeper into your mapping. First, then afterwards, make sure that your suppliers code, I'm sure that many brands, I don't know if some of the audience are working already for some brands. I'm sure all of you have a supplier code of conduct. I'm sure you all have contracts, but review them. Review them with the optic and with lenses of somebody that wants to support the supplier into becoming more responsible for the well-being of both the brand and the supplier. So having enforceable supply codes starts from a strict collaboration with your supplier. So making sure that it's not just a written document that they sign, because unfortunately, that signed supplier code will not protect you, will not be enough. It remains a piece of paper if it is not enforced and followed and agreed with the supplier. So do not just sign yet another contract, yet another supplier code of conduct that has not a possibility to be realistically implemented on the ground. Once you do that, make sure that the governance system that organizes all the processes to assure that your supply chain creates no problems and creates no damage to your brand, making sure that are linked to this decision making. What does it mean? I mean, it's a big word, right? I mean, this is blah, blah, blah that I'm telling you. In practical terms, it means that once you have agreed with your suppliers to go and understand how to improve the labor condition that he's offering while making your products, well, once you have done that, if there is a problem, if there is a difficulties or an issue, then make sure that this is taken into consideration into the entire designing of the management of your suppliers. So your decision-making have to be based on the reality on the ground and on the problem that you're facing on the ground. And in order to do that, also create some grievance mechanisms. Very often, I mean, the problems are hidden. It doesn't take much to it's also somehow human. If you have a problem and you are a manufacturer in, I don't know, somewhere, and you have 20 employees and you have a problem, and some of the employees maybe are not happy with the way you manage them, you try not to show it, right? So if you grieve the employees that are experiencing those working conditions every day, if you give them the possibility to raise issues, then back to what we said before, this is essential for you to create code of conduct that work and make their life better and create a decision making that is affecting also them, starting from the bottom up and going bottom down. So this ecosystem has to be coherent, and the data that you have to collect have to be both supporting the compliance mechanism, but also the communication. How often do you have somebody that it's working only in one part of the company. It doesn't really communicate or share the data with someone else that is in the other side of the company. I know I make shoes. I have my own suppliers, I have my own manufacturing processes, I have my own processes. And yes, there is some common ground, but in reality, I don't really know. I don't really share my data with someone else that is making shirt within the same brand. Well, that is not longer possible. So in order to build a responsible supply chain, if we could give you some basic, again, common sense based strategies or mechanism or methodology that, again, are very well known, this could be the main 5. It's more easier said than done. I understand that because, having worked so many years with brands, this requires a cultural shift. But trust me, it is a necessary one for the entire industry to not just be, busted into the next scandal. So, Sarah, you want to get the next slide?
Yeah.
Why should you do it? Really, guys, it's not easy. It's hard. I mean, it's really, really complex, especially the bigger you are, the more complex you are. But your reputation and your market trust is the basis also for you to operate inside the entire industry. And this, if you will make sure that the next scandal will not take you away with them, this will create a much stronger market position. You will also lower down the regulatory and compliance risk. Again, maybe your company is too small, it is not affected by the legislation coming up, but the effect of the standardization of expectation from the client is going to touch you anyway. What does it mean? That it's going to be considered normal from the consumer perspective that you will share information, you will share data. And if the big companies do it and you don't do it because the legislation doesn't oblige you to do it, again, back, your regulatory risk will go lower, but your market trust and consumer behavior possibly will affect your sales. Because that's what it is. Now, the operational continuity and the fewer supplier disruption. As we said, picture that one of your main suppliers right in the middle of production for your new season is hit by a scandal, and you can't rely on that suppliers anymore. Let's consider that it's not even a key suppliers, but it's still an important suppliers. Most likely, you can't exchange them very quickly with someone else, or you will have to start all over again to scout or to allocate production of that part of production to the new manufacturer. It's not that simple, and that affects the continuity of your operation. And down the line, you will maybe have your product too late in the store, and that will affect again your sales, and back to square one will affect your brand value and the final evaluation also from the investor side, because the improved supplier's performance is directly linked to the financial strength that comes from having a supply chain that is operationally, that is fair, that is balanced, that is responsible, and that create trust. Again, that's a key word. Your trust is essential for the people to give you their money. Let's break it down to some very simple words. So the financial strength that comes from from mitigating the risk in the supply chain is very, very big. Now, for the next slide, these are some of the benefits that I already tried to illustrate before from having a responsible supply chain. So consumer favor responsibility, we know that. But, and the alignment with the legislation and also, better access to finance. But we already discussed this. So in the next slide, which the better access to finance is the focus we want to have with you tonight as well, because, financing, when it is documented and by ESG, traceable and reliable information preferential financing and also impact financing, maybe that's if something is of interest also for your organization, is going to be more available. Your eligibility for funding is going to increase because more and more the EU grants and ESG investment require due diligence and require strong traceability and risk monitoring. The investor confidence and evaluation, tier by tier supply chain transparency is reducing your risk of non-compliance, and is going to improve the willingness of investor to trust your operation and to trust that will not be taken away from the next scandal, and your credit reputation will also go higher. And again, the financial institutes are more and more paying attention to what is happening, and the environmental focus that has been one of the key in the past years is shifting or balancing up with the social, the sustainability part that again is happening into the supply chain or into the entire value chain. If we could go to the next slide. Now, of course, we would like to support you and have some strategic support in order to support this process and to support this cultural shift, because again, this is what we are talking about. So it is very important whether you seek for strategic support or not. I mean, whether we could accompany you in the process or not, but it's very important that you design a traceability framework to understand exactly who does what, when, and how not to lose the overview and bring transparency and less opacity into the entire operation. Making sure that your purchasing practices, the supplier code of conduct, the supplier management is done in line with due diligence obligation. Have people trained. So many of the staff have to deal with complex issue, and you are adding them an extra layer that requires their skills and their knowledge to be upgraded. This is something most likely that they didn't have to do before. In my career, in my experience, I have had so many times people working in the purchase department say, "Oh no, my suppliers, they have all the certification." Okay, right. And then you ask the question, which certification? "Oh no, they have many." Many? Can you please give it to me? Can you give me a copy of the certification, just a PDF? And then, they start to receive all these papers, all these documents. They are not simply able to read, not because they are, stupid or whatever. They simply just don't understand and don't have the knowledge to read all the insurance and all the certification or whatever other documents that they have been provided by the supplier. So train your internal team and prepare for audit and disclosure. Please, and that's something that I would like to stress. I don't know, maybe just if you want to keep one thing out of this long discussion of mine, keep that in mind. When preparing an audit, do not just go for the classical audits, and that is just done once, and then you report and you don't even read the report and you don't even want to disclose what is in there. Organize your audits in a way that creates a good basis for your decision, but for your manager to take the right decision. So when you prepare for the audit, make sure that the disclosure and the result are readable, are understandable, and are really reflecting the reality of your supply chain, and making sure that the suppliers work with you. They're not just a receiver of yet more rules, yet more things to do. They're already busy producing all your things. Don't just give them an extra layer of more task to perform, because most likely you will lose them down the road. Try to understand how to work with them, how to engage them in a way that is beneficial for both of you. All right, next slide. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but I hope that a few of the key elements that we are trying to give you today will stick with you.
No, exactly. I think we are giving a great kickoff point in order to understand what to do and how to do it well.
Yeah. Now I will leave Sarah to do to introduce the technology layers, because what I've been describing in the past 20 minutes is the process. Now, how do you make sure the technology help you doing this job? And that's how Sarah comes in to try to explain you that.
Yeah, thank you. Because together as Renoon, we built a system, we built a procedure in order to make the supply chain due diligence, to do starting from risk assessment, and of course we are a platform, we are a digital tool. So it's important also to back up the data digitally, of course, and have a kind of validation system throughout this. So let me show to you in details what we built. So we built what we call the new operating system for responsible supply chain, because through a platform you can really make the process standard, even though it's also customizable according to your data collection needs. So according to the information that you may already have, according to the new information that you have to collect from supplier, also the structure of your supply chain. So we have a platform for making your own process standard and organized, and we guide you. We also give you the training for following a methodology for doing risk assessment. And on the other side, the platform is able to already do a data validation, because we built the technology behind, in the sense that we use 3 different layers for data validation. The first one is the use of AI for validating the data that are inputted, in the sense that to analyze inconsistencies, to analyzing missing information. Then an external cross-check is also performed, especially when it goes to information about third party, in the sense that we cross-check with external databases of, for example, certification bodies. And then on the other side, of course, it's still important to have a kind of human control and human data validation, which is also performed through the platform. And together we built what we call supply chain due diligence, social due diligence, with a first step methodology, because the key starting point, the first step is, of course, doing the risk assessment. So we baseline together, and also we'll later share with you an initial tool, an initial assessment form to do that. So we baseline the supply chain maturity of your company with a free assessment, and then starting from there, according to the inconsistencies, to the lack of information, to the missing traceability information, we structure together the data collection. First of all, we define the priorities, and we customize the platform for your specific needs. And then there's more the strategic part, which give you what we call enable and guide, and then improvement, because we offer the training, the strategic consultancy, in order to support you following a coherent methodology and available methodology for social due diligence. And then on the other side, also to support your suppliers to provide all this information in a structured way. And then the first step is what also Caterina was stressing out, that is super important. So over the time, it's important to do ongoing monitoring, analyze the data that you get, and also train your suppliers, especially in the areas that may need to improve. So that's the methodology that we follow together, which is really customizable, and it's supported by our team. And we wanted to show you. Then I also see that there are already a couple of questions in the chat, so we will reply to those in a couple of minutes. But I think it's also important to highlight that all these supply chain due diligence work then can also it's an interesting touch point for consumers and for stakeholders in general, because also displaying and be transparent with all the supply chain information behind the final product is something that it's engaging and really makes consumers understand the value behind the product. So that's a case study that we had with a brand we work with, and that's so the three key next step that we encourage you and your company to do is, if you have not started yet with the risk assessment, to do the strategic assessment with us, and we'll be sharing with you a link to do it for free. And then starting from the level of the level of risk that you will highlight through the assessment, it's important that to build the digital infrastructure for the recollection to support visibility. And then, as said also before, it's not enough to do just audits, but it's also important to keep going with the work over the time and monitor the changes and the improvements, or either the lacks of the supply chains over the time. So here's the assessment that we were mentioning to you. So you can scan this QR code. You will be redirected to a landing page where, through a simple form, you can already have an idea of what's the status of your supply chain at the moment, if any risk is already highlighted. And from there, we can then work together on better understanding what's the actual next step and what would be the methodology to follow in your specific case. Of course, we'll be sharing also this to you and in the post-event email that we'll be sending to you. Caterina, I don't know if you want to add anything on this.
No. I just want to say that out of the two questions that one of the person asked in the chat is indeed, how do we understand if the risk assessment process we have already in place is good or not? Well, this could be one of the tools. So we have developed this risk assessment. So feel free to use it. Try to understand how good it is so far. It's very general, of course. It's not details. We also made it in order to be user friendly. But you could have a first, understanding, if you've never done it, a first understanding of how to assess the risk and the risk process. So feel free to scan the QR code. For Luisa, that asked up until which tier will be necessary to trace the supply chain, if there are requirements. Well, right now, the legislation requires only tier 1, the obligation. But as we try to explain up to now, the responsibility for what happens also in the other tier remains. So whether you are obliged or not by the law, if something happened in the sub-suppliers of your main suppliers, and somehow they can prove that the brand took economic advantage from that misconduct, then you will still be persecutable. Let me be very clear. If your main supplier of the bag charges you an amount of money that is lower to the market because the sub-suppliers is, maybe not respecting all the labor legislation or the salary legal requirement that is supposed to do, and that's been the case from all the brands that have been involved in the scandal. Basically, they found out that the hourly rates were much lower than what could be expected to be dignified, let's say, or to be allowed in line with a national contract? Well, even if the legislation is not obliging you from a European perspective, you will still be responsible because, you took advantage from the fact that you paid that bag less than was supposed to cost. Hence, you are liable for the damages that have been done to the workers that was underpaid. I don't know if I have been clear enough. Because then you no longer go into the due diligence legislation, you go into the national legislation that prevent the exploitation of workers and make the brand profiting from exploitation of worker legally responsible for whatever. Doesn't matter in which tier.
Yeah, but we saw today that it's not just about compliance, it's not about the risk of fines, but there are also many other advantages that that should be pushing you to do supply chain due diligence.
Yeah. First and foremost, also the financial implication of your reputation risk analysis and assessment.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't see any further questions. So this may be the end of today's session. We'll be happy anyway to collect any other question also later on. And of course, to support you in the process of building your risk assessment methodology and all this process to make your supply chain responsible. So yeah, first of all, thank you, Caterina, for sharing your knowledge and for your time today. So yeah, if we receive any further question, we'll be happy to answer with the Caterina as well.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and wish you a good evening.